Electricians, I'm going to answer that challenge question. I challenged you with it recently. It read, what is the minimum calculated lighting load for a 3,300 square foot dwelling unit with 3 small appliance branch circuits and 1 laundry circuit? Okay, so this is a smaller version of a service load calculation. Now, as I'm walking you through this, I'm going to give you 2 answers. Okay, the reason I'm giving you 2 answers is because if you're in the 2023 and prior, you're going to get 1 correct answer. But if you're in the 2026, they made a code change that gives us a different answer. And this book is based off of the 2026. So I do want to give you both answers. It's going to be similar. Okay, so in the 2023 and prior, we're going to be going to Article 220 to find our answer. They moved that code from Article 220 to 120 in the 2026 code. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to write down 2023, and I'm going to put a line down here, and then a 2026. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is go to Article 220.41, and this is going to be 120.41 in the 2026. Okay, now what it tells us is that we do 3 volt amps per square foot. Okay, now in the 2026 they tell us that the minimum, which is what our question is, the minimum is actually 2 volt amps per square foot. Okay, it does tell us that the maximum is 3 volt amps, so that would be the same answer, but our question reads minimum, so we actually have to do 2 volt amps per square foot. So what is our square footage here? We have 3,300. So I'm going to multiply that by 3. I'm going to get 9,900 volt amps. And then here it'll be 3,300 times 2, giving us 6,600 volt amps. Now, that's the volt amps per square foot, but there's more to this question, right? So what is the minimum calculated load for the square footage? But it has 3 small appliance branch circuits and then 1 laundry circuit. Okay, so the code article that you need to go now is Article 220. I believe it's 52. Where it tells us that for each small appliance branch circuit, so each, there's 3 in this question, for each small appliance we have to do 1,500 volt amps, so times 1,500, which is 1,530, so we're going to add an additional 4,500 volt amps. And then 220.52b tells us the same thing. For each laundry circuit, so for the question it's just 1, we have to add an additional 1,500 volt amps. So I'm going to add those together, and it's going to give me 0, 0, 10, 5, 6, an extra 6,000 volt amps. Okay, so that's actually the same thing. It's going to carry over, but again, it's just that the code article is different. Okay, so 120.52a and b is going to give us the same conclusion. Okay, it's 4,500 volt amps accounting for the small appliances, 1,500 accounting for the laundry, so that's an additional 6,000 volt amps. Okay, so now I'm going to add these 2 numbers together. Okay, so 9 plus 6 is 15,900 volt amps total, and then 6 and 6 is 12,600. Okay, so notice how, again, in the 2023, it's a different volt amp calculation than the 2026, but now we can get our demand factors. Okay, so some of you might be asking, hold on, it's doing the calculated lighting load. Why am I accounting for the small appliance branch circuits? And that's a great question. So I'm going to show you where in, again, it's Article 120 now, not 220, because I'm reading out of the 2026, okay? So what did I say? 120.52 A and B, okay? So let's take a look here. I'll zoom in a little bit so that you can see better. Okay, small appliance. In each dwelling unit, the load shall be calculated at 1,500 volt amps for each 2-wire small appliance branch circuit, as covered by 210.11c1, where the load is subdivided, blah, 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 I don't care. These loads shall be permitted to be included with the general lighting load and subjected to the demand factors provided in table 120.45, which is our next step. So 120.45 is this table here, okay? So for dwelling units, our first 3,000 volt amps, we take 100% of that, okay? So that, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to go here to my 2023 calculation, 15.9. My first 3,000, I'm taking 100% of. So I'm actually going to take this 3,000 and I'm going to save it for later. 3,000, I know I'm writing really sloppily right now, I apologize, but I'm going to subtract that, and the remainder is 12,900 volt amps, okay? So again, let's go back to this table. My first 3,000, I'm taking 100%. The remainder, as long as it does not exceed 120,000, I'm taking only 35% of, okay? So that 12,900, I'm gonna multiply it by 0.35. Let me get a calculator. Okay, so 12,900 times 0.35 gives me 4,515 volt amps, but now that 3,000 that I saved for later, now I need to add that back. So my final answer is 7,515 volt amps. Now, that is only if you're in the 2023 and prior. I wanted to include that because I believe most people are still using the 2023, but I want to give you the book answer, okay? I say book answer meaning my book because my book is based on the 2026, okay? So it's the same code. My first 3,000, I'm going to save for later, so 3,000. The remainder is 9,600 volt amps. I need to multiply that by 35%. So calculating 9,600, I'm going to multiply that by 0.35, and it's going to give me 3,360 volt amps. I'm going to add this back in because, again, 100%. And my final answer is going to be 6,360. That is my 2026 final answer, and it looks like A is exactly that, 6,360. A, I believe, is my final answer. That's where I do my work, even though I didn't do my work there. And it's saying A, 6,360 volt amps, is my final answer. So if I were you electricians, get used to that process, okay? Starting with the volt amps per square foot, moving on to the small appliance load, moving on to the laundry load. Now, what's important with this code, with specifically the small appliance load, is sometimes the question doesn't specify, right? So, okay, so these two questions specify how many small appliance branch circuits we have, but sometimes the question won't say that. The question might say, what's the minimum calculated load for a 3,300 square foot dwelling, period. That's it. It doesn't say how many small appliance branch circuits we have. But again, according to this code, if I want to go back to Article 120.52, let's zoom in here. This is a great code lesson. So if you've gotten this far, you're going to learn something that many electricians skip on. It says, in each dwelling unit, the load shall be calculated at 1,500 volt amps for each 2-wire small appliance branch circuit. Okay, but what if the question doesn't specify how many small appliance I have? Notice how this says, as covered by 210.11c1. Let me go to Article 210.11c1. 210.11c1, where are you? 210.11c1 tells me, C1, in addition to the number of branch circuits, this section requires 2 or more. So if the question doesn't specify, it doesn't matter. I have to account for at least 2 small appliance branch circuits, and similarly with my laundry, I have to supply 1. So even though the question doesn't specify, if in that scenario, I have to account for 2 small appliances and 1 laundry. Hopefully you guys learned something. Hopefully you remember that. We have more in-depth lessons on this channel, on YouTube, on my website. Again, we're dedicated to helping electricians fully understand all types of questions that you might see on your licensing exam. Comment down below if you learned something, if you have any questions. I'll see you guys on the next one.